Obviously a sense of relief in the sense that, everyone saw the 9 minutes of video footage. I don't know if everyone, but the vast majority of the country saw the 9 minutes of video footage. And I think there was a very reasonable sense amongst people that if this doesn't constitute murder, then what could constitute murder? And we should say that, I think the numbers are a little bit difficult to find because we don't keep statistics on this, but there have been less than a half a dozen police convictions of murder while on duty out of the, depending on how you calculate it, 10 to 15,000 killings by police over the past 15, 20 years. And like I say, it depends on whose statistics you're going to believe, or because there just isn't, we don't, as a country, keep these statistics, which in and of itself, I think, is indicative of a problem, because we probably don't want to know what the numbers are. And despite the fact that in this one instance, there has been accountability and justice, at least so far, has been served. There's 3 other officers who are going to be on trial later in the summer for their essentially just sitting idly by and watching Derek Chauvin kill.
And not reporting it. I mean, I know this might not be the actual charge on trial, but after it was over, none of them turned him in either. So
exactly. And of course, we all know that this is that without that videotape that a 17-year-old woman took, probably none of this happens. I mean, we saw how the Minneapolis PD reported the murder day of. And here's the biggest point as to why, this is one of those necessary but wildly insufficient in terms of really dealing with the problem of both policing and racism. And because there is a general problem with policing, it is, like many other things in this country, exacerbated because of race. And when the racism of the police and the general authority that they take and they have, and the lack of accountability come together, this is what you get. So there needs to be a systemic wholesale change to what constitutes policing in this country. And the areas in which they are allowed to sort of function need to be dramatically limited. And
in my view, a dismantlement of the current policing structure and building something new, because yes, policing exacerbates existing racism, but this structure of policing is built on white supremacy. Without
a doubt. And just to give you a sense of how sort of narrow or unique and this situation is in terms of this outcome, people should understand that the reason why Derek Chauvin was prosecuted is because at one point, Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, made the decision to hand this over, to take it from the local DA and hand it over essentially to Keith Ellison, who is the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. You can look at but just pop this up. There was a thread by Justin J. M1
from last year, just kind of documenting here, just the differences. I didn't mean to cut you off. Between the DA and Keith Ellison's complaint against Chauvin.
This is Justin Miller, and he and Emma had saved this, and it's very it really illustrates why we got this ruling and why we don't get rulings like this, and why the fact that there has been justice in this narrow circumstance really does not have implications in and of itself for the wider change in policing that has to happen. There are massive discrepancies in the DA's complaint versus the Attorney General's complaint.
Keith Ellison deserves enormous credit, in my view. I mean, this, I think, highlights a larger problem, as you're alluding to. The fact of the matter is that attorney generals throughout the country and DAs throughout the country have been historically overwhelmingly more likely to side with police officers who they know and work with in these instances. And Ellison is a progressive who became attorney general, and that changed the game. But he is by far an exception to the rule. Without
a doubt. I mean, we see this all the time. There's a conflict of interest, broadly speaking, with these prosecutors and the police, and the way that they simply frame the complaint in many respects, essentially determines the trajectory and where you're going to land in terms of a conviction. Just off the top, there's just a couple of things here. The DA wrote that Mr. Floyd actively resisted being handcuffed. The AG did not say, just left that out because they did not find that was the case. The DA once handcuffed, Mr. Floyd, quote, became compliant and walked with Officer Lane. Well, the AG doesn't say became compliant because the assumption was that he was compliant. And in fact, the AG included that Mr. Floyd sat down and he said, "Thank you, man," and was calm. So the characterization of what was going on there, why, all leading up to that moment where Chauvin puts his knee on his neck.
Yeah, this just goes to show, like, when Ben Shapiro talks about the facts of the case, that you cannot trust the facts as established by police. They just lie about using, like, suggestive language.
And the DA here, too. The DA writes, officers made attempts to put Floyd in the car and, quote, he struggled with officers by intentionally falling down. The AG writes, officers were trying to force Floyd in when he said he could not breathe.
Which we saw was documented.
Well, and then all of this stuff becomes more established when you actually see some video. AG quotes Floyd as saying, "I'm about to die." The DA does not have that quote. The DA video shows Mr. Floyd continue to move and breathe at 8:24 seconds with Mr. Floyd stopped breathing. And then the AG wrote, while Mr. Floyd showed slight movements, his movements and sounds decreased until 8:24. Mr. Floyd stopped moving. So the point is that this report in and of itself essentially provides the context in which Chauvin murdered Floyd and what he should have known and what the other cops should have known at that moment. And again, we cannot rely on having an attorney general who is not caught up in their conflict of interest in maintaining their relationship with their cops to deal with this issue writ large. It is good in this situation, but it is completely narrow. And the problem is that we see from our politicians to our media, and I'm even talking the ones that are ostensibly sympathetic to this.
Nancy Pelosi, key, example from yesterday.
Do not understand this concept. In fact, here is Nancy Pelosi with her first statement. And she sort of smoothed it over with a tweet later. But I mean, just like this, and we should say Axios is now reporting that at least staffers in the House and the Senate are saying this alleviates the pressure for any type of systemic reform.
Which is the exact opposite
of what's
attitude.
Necessary.
Yes,
right.
That is necessary.
Thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice, for being there to call out to your mom. How heartbreaking was that? Call out for your mom. I can't breathe. But because of you and because of thousands, millions of people around the world who came out for justice, your name will always be synonymous with justice.
Now, he sacrificed himself so his murderer could be convicted?
I mean, let's just even be really, really generous and say that was poorly framed. But the concept behind it is I mean, you've just made it clear the absurdity of that statement, but the concept behind it, that this has provided justice outside of the narrow confines of someone being held accountable for murdering somebody, is absurd. It's absurd. It
shows how she's, overstating the impact of this outcome, and how this is the exact dynamic that you just said. How Democrats like her think, okay, great, justice in this case, magic bullet or silver bullet, this is going to solve things. And as we saw, that I believe there was a report that as the verdict was being handed down, another person was shot by police.
That's a different situation. That woman had a knife in her hand, was about to. It looks like in terms of the video.
Case, but or maybe I'm
no,
not
that's
sure.
In Ohio. But the point is, it doesn't. The idea that there is some greater form of justice that is taking place in this moment beyond the fact that, yes, the murderer was convicted is absurd. And trying to make it into that misses the entire point totally, that there is a problem that is greater than George Floyd, that has been going on for decades upon decades upon decades before George Floyd was even born, never mind since he's been murdered, and that it's much broader and systemic problem. There is an example of a politician not getting it right. Here's an example of a news person also completely missing the point. And, I imagine is sympathetic to this situation, but completely oblivious to the sort of broader systemic problems. This is Brian Williams, and he's interviewing. Who is the guy that who's speaking? Brendan.
Cedric Alexander.
Okay. And so Alexander is basically outlining essentially like, look, one point earlier, he says, we have a problem with the police that populate these police departments. But what we also have a problem with is the concept of policing, that we are over policing people, et cetera, et cetera. And here is so here is Brian Williams responding to this guy.
We're moving into a new age. So regardless of what outcome of this particular verdict may happen to be, one thing is for certain here is that we're all going to have to keep our foot on the gas and look not just for reform and reimagining police, which are words that to me are becoming dated, but we're going to have to define public safety in a very different way than what we have in the past. And what does that mean? And what is it that we want police officers to do going forward?
Pause it right there.
Today can be the
Pause it right there. So what he's saying is that, like, we've heard reform. The Minneapolis Police Department was under, had a reform program. We need to fundamentally change the way that police exist in our society and what we look to police to do, because it's not working. It's not working, period, broadly speaking. And then, as if like there is an allergy to looking at the systemic implications of this stuff, watch the response on this.
The beginning of that. So we look forward to see what happens.
I'll do you one better. I'll say that the George Floyd case has made activists out of average citizens who never imagined that they would be marching on the streets during the summer in a pandemic, but they did. And to combine everything you just said, I hope some small percentage of the mostly young people who have flooded the streets of our country for good reason, feeling propelled and compelled to become activists, I hope it occurs to some of them that perhaps a way to change policing is to get involved, change it from the inside, enact the changes to the policies that they're protesting. That would be a great influx of a population into the policing community. Cedric Alexander.
That was not, in fact, one better.
That was actually, yes, significantly worse. Now, if he had even stopped and said, like, these people, if his implication was like, I hope these people get involved in government, and then, but he said the police community. I mean, there is a a massive blind spot, or I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to be sort of somewhat charitable, but the most charitable perspective on this is I'm just incapable of registering the idea that this system is fundamentally wrong and broken, and not even broken, because broken implies it's not working the way that it's supposed to, that the system as designed does not function in the proper way. And it's as if that they, politicians, media, and this is the best of the lot. Let's go to the worst of the lot when we're talking about, sort of like, what dominates the culture, between the news and the politicians on these issues, at least in terms of like the way the dominant narrative. This is all you get. So on one end of the spectrum, we don't need anything systemic. We just need better people in there. Or that one case ends up bringing some sense of like broad justice that is applicable to changing things. Or the other end of it is, of course, is that like, this is a travesty. And here is Tucker Carlson to bring in that perspective.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. The jury in the Derek Chauvin trial came to a unanimous and unequivocal verdict this afternoon. Please don't hurt us. The jurors spoke for many in this country. Everyone understood perfectly well the consequences of an acquittal in this case. After nearly a year of burning and looting and murder by BLM, that was never in doubt. Last night, 2,000 miles from Minneapolis, police in Los Angeles preemptively blocked roads. Why? They knew what would happen if Derek Chauvin got off. In the end, he didn't get off. If given the maximum sentence under the law, he will spend the rest of his life in prison. Is that a fair punishment? Is the officer guilty of the specific crimes for which he was just convicted? We can debate all that, and over this hour we will. But here's what we can't debate. No mob has the right to destroy our cities. Not under any circumstances, not for any reason. No politician or media figure has the right to intimidate a jury. And no political party.
I just hope people understand the delicious irony of him with the backdrop of the Capitol building.
Yeah.
When you talk about a mob intimidating a jury, or let's say like a set of politicians, or destroying a building, as it were. But again, like, to report this outcome of the case with the primary implication that the only reason why they found this guy, Chauvin, who stuck his knee on the back of a neck of a person lying on the ground,
said, "I can't
for
breathe,"
no
24
reason.
times.
For no reason. The only reason why the jury found them guilty was because they were afraid. Is rather twisted, but let him finish his.
But just quickly, Sam, you have to be fair to him. He had about 400 chyrons ready about rioting and looting, and since that didn't happen, he probably had to rewrite this on the fly.
That's true. We're still going with the rioting.
Yeah, he kind of shoehorned that in anyway.
Any reason. No politician or media figure has the right to intimidate a jury. And no political party has the right to impose a different standard of justice on its own supporters. Those things are unacceptable in America. All of them are happening now. If they continue to happen, decent, productive people will leave. The country as we knew it will be over. So we must stop this current insanity. It's an attack on civilization. At stake is far more than the future of Derek Chauvin or the memory of George Floyd. At stake is America.
Yeah.
Where are all these people going to go? These hardworking, decent people are going to go where there's no protests, when there's massive injustice, or even, frankly, in many places, just not massive, just injustice.
He's really stretching there. But yeah, back quickly to the Brian Williams clip, because again, as you mentioned, I think he's well intentioned. There is going to be, and we have to resist it with every turn, a compulsive desire to make this an individualistic focus. How just this one individual case, say this one BLM protester who joins a police force, can change everything. And what the whole focus should be, and this is why, you have to treat this as a moment of accountability and not as justice. What needs to happen is a dismantling of the policing system and a rebuilding of it, and in a different vision. And that's where the focus always should be. And I know that might freak out Tucker Carlson in every which way, but he's trying with all of his might to make sure the focus is on something else, on rioting, looting, etc. And unfortunately, Nancy Pelosi, Brian Williams, in their own way, willing or otherwise, are doing the same thing in a different flavor, making it just about this one case as opposed to what is needed, which is systemic overhaul.